All right, everybody, welcome back. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app, live video on the X platform and on YouTube. At Mike Gill Show, Kevin Durso covers the Flyers for 97.3 ESPN.com, and he joins me right now with the a little bit of breaking Flyers news earlier today in the noon hour. It was reported that the Flyers have decided on the next head coach of the Philadelphia Flyers, and he is a very familiar name to Flyers fans. Let's bring in our Flyers insider, Kevin Durso, with the latest on the Flyers, who have decided, Kevin, they are going back to their roots, and they are hiring Rick Tocchet as the team's 25th head coach. And we kind of talked about this was a possibility. Then he did some television stuff. Maybe he wanted to get out of coaching for a little bit. But Rick Tocchet is the next Flyers head coach.
Yeah, I feel like this was brewing for a while at this point. You know, the day that John Tortorella got fired, I think either that day or the day after, I wrote about some early possibilities. Rick Tocchet's name was the first on the list because it always seemed like it came back to him in some way, shape, or form. The connections that were there, the idea that he was interviewed the last time they had an opening. So this goes back a while, the interest in him as a head coach. And I feel like you could be the biggest supporter of this. You could be his biggest detractor. You can still acknowledge that you kind of felt like this was what was going to happen. I think it was just the first name that was out there. And once you were past the hurdle of the Vancouver job, that he was not going to remain with Vancouver, was not going to sign on there long-term with a new contract, and he truly became a free agent in the coaching circle, that's when it became more realistic. And sure seems like, after that, we're about couple weeks or so after that decision became official and Tocchet was actually available, that now this is about to happen. So it didn't take too long. It really picked up over the course of the early part of this week that things were really going there. There was kind of a, he did some TV work over the weekend on TNT, and there was a finality to his exit from the weekend. Kind of like, this was fun to do it again for a weekend, and you just could see the signs coming.
Let's start with why Tocchet. He has been all over the place, and I wouldn't say that he has a boatload of success as a head coach. He has been in Vancouver. He has been in Phoenix. That was a disastrous situation there. I don't know if that's all his fault, but why is Rick Tocchet the hire here?
Well, he's got a good reputation in the coaching circle in terms of just among NHL front offices. There's people who are very high on him on the inside of that think he's a great communicator. He's got a loyalty to him that players really latch on to. He was, in addition to all the head coaching jobs, he was an assistant coach in Pittsburgh as well for a few years under Mike Sullivan when they won back-to-back Stanley Cups. So you come back to names like, Sidney Crosby loved playing for him, and Quinn Hughes in Vancouver loved playing for him. Those are superstar level players. And that's what makes you believe that this can work with, say, a player like Matvei Michkov, who, if you can latch on to a guy like that and have that good relationship with your superstars, it can only breed more potential success because you can bring in potentially bigger names. To me, it's also about the culture building. He establishes a reputation for that as well. It's, it's not going to be to the same level that, as Danny Briere said at the end of the season press conference, anybody they bring in is going to be milder than John Tortorella, but I don't think you're taking that big of a step back from that, where you're getting somebody who is complete opposite of Tortorella. You're getting someone who's just has a softer side, is a good communicator in that respect, which is going to go a long way with kind of how things ended with Tortorella. But he's still going to be, he's still going to be tough on guys at times, and he's going to do what he has to do as a coach, and it's earned him respect. The hard part is that this is all he has, is that reputation and kind of the connection to the Flyers in the past and being part of that culture. He doesn't have the numbers or the successes. You coach for 9 different seasons, 3 different locations, one really good year where the Vancouver Canucks made the playoffs, won the division, and that's really about as far as it goes. We had one season where he technically made the playoffs in Phoenix. That was kind of it just wasn't there. There's an asterisk on that one because it was during the COVID year that they added some extra teams to it. So he got in kind of on a technicality, and that's what people kind of latch on to from the other side of this, where it's maybe they don't get it because there's no track record of long-term success and really nothing to latch on to other than He is a former Flyer. He understands the culture. To me, I think that another reason why he's involved in this is kind of the same thing as Keith Jones and Danny Briere. These are two guys that have talked about, we know what it's like when it's good. We want to get back to that. And I think they're bringing in a guy who matches that mindset, that sees this as, I want to help get them back to where they were. And, you're thinking about a guy who was a player two different times in technically two different eras, during the 80s and then comes back in the early 2000s and finishes out his career. So he started his career in Philly, he ended his playing career in Philly, and now it comes back full circle as a head coach.
Kevin Durso, 97.3 ESPN.com, covers the Flyers. Rick Tocchet is the Flyers guy. He will be the next head coach here. If you're saying, okay, that's the reasons why, was there somebody out there that you think is more attractive, or do you think, no, this was the right hire for the Philadelphia Flyers?
It's not that I really saw somebody else that stood out above and beyond. My worry is kind of along the lines of the average tenure of a head coach in the NHL. It was posted recently somewhere that the average tenure of all the four major sports, and most of them are 3 to 4 years, and then the NHL came up and it was under 2, because that's the way it's been lately. Just so much turnover. Even if Tocchet gets another 3 years, to work with here, and he's already, he's 61 years old, so he's already kind of maybe going toward the end of the line in terms of what he might be able to do from a career standpoint around the game like that. It's not to say that I don't know how much impact he can make in that short period of time, but it leaves you with kind of a limited window to make this happen. I feel like for Keith Jones and Danny Briere, this journey started not necessarily just by them taking the job, but you drafted Matvei Michkov with your first draft pick as this regime. And that first year that Michkov didn't play and was still overseas, okay, it doesn't really affect the timeline too much. But once you brought him over and now his timeline starts going, just go 2 years down the line here where potentially, let's just say you're coming up on that critical third year with Tocchet as the head coach, where a lot of guys sometimes don't make it through the third year as a head coach. Jones and Briere will be on their 5th off season after 2 seasons under Tocchet. They will, Michkov will be due for a contract because he'll be through the 3 years of his entry-level deal. And to me, if you're 5 off seasons into Jones and Briere overseeing this thing and not much further along than you are now, then they are just as much on the line. So to me, this is a big thing for the whole regime, because it really puts everybody, not just puts jobs on the line, but to me, this puts their reputations on the line because of the connections. Keith Jones was beloved as a broadcaster. Danny Briere was a fan favorite. Now you bring in a guy like Tocchet, who's in the Flyers Hall of Fame. These guys have long-standing relationships, and I think back to the way things ended with Ron Hextall and how after a certain point in time, if it doesn't go well and it just doesn't, if this is, turns out to be destined to fail, it's going to ruin the reputation of those guys in the light of the fan base, because they'll see them for the most recent occurrence, not the history. So it's a big risk. To me, it's a gamble that you're taking. You're trying to lean on the culture side of this. You're trying to lean on the guys who understand things, but you're taking a risk in the process.
So when you hire a guy like this, does this say development or does this say win now?
It says development in the immediate, because I don't think they have the roster for it. So they think he can teach some of the younger guys on the roster. That would have to be part of the equation. But it does sound a lot like the kick this into high gear in another offseason kind of move. I don't know that they're going to go too overly aggressive this offseason, because you have to start to factor in the idea of what the cost might be to be that aggressive. You have to be certain. To me, this is the first, making this coaching decision is the first of a series of decisions that are going to have to be made, whether it's the 6th overall pick, the other draft picks this year, any trades you make, any free agent signings you make, whether you do an offer sheet. You've got to get pretty much all of these decisions right. And the coach is the start of it. And then you have to start to fill in all these other gaps with what the roster looks like. And if you're not able to do that, then I don't think this is going to last too long for everybody involved, if that's the case. So I think that it's going to be go time very quickly here. I don't know about this offseason, but certainly by next offseason, they need to start turning the corner on this. And that, to me, speeds this up. So that to me is why they feel comfortable doing this. They think he can be a good communicator and teach, but they also think he can still be here when it's go time.
All right, Kevin Durso, I guess we'll leave with this. I mean, obviously the free agency, that won't begin until after the playoffs, and but the most important guy is Michkov, who I guess was in an accident the other day. I would imagine they think that Michkov and Tocchet will have similar a personality that will blend. I'm sure that had to be something that was in at high priority here. Someone that will be able to take Michkov to that next level.
Yeah, and there's people who, there's people out there who have doubts about that because Tocchet has a similar style to Tortorella to a degree, and at least on ice sometimes. But at the same time, I can't see how Keith Jones and Danny Briere go into this process and don't ask all the important questions here and make sure that this is the right fit for that player in particular, but anybody else who comes up, whether it's anybody you drafted last year, who you draft this year, you need to be prepared for that part of the equation because that is your future. And, Michkov's a big part of it. The one thing that I do think lines up perfectly here is they're both going to be competitive mindsets. They're both going to be, Tocchet loves guys who have that dedication level to the game that seem like they're, that are all in personalities. Michkov's definitely that. He'll love that about him. And then you just have to kind of see and hope that they unlock all of that potential in him from the offensive side, really, because you can lean on the defensive side of the game for so much, but at some point in time, you also need your star players to go out and have the type of things we've seen. If you're watching the Stanley Cup playoffs this year and you're watching the numbers that Mikko Rantanen's putting up or sometimes the plays Connor McDavid's making and these game changers out there that can do that. If you have a game changer on your roster like Michkov appears to be, then you want him to be able to let loose and do whatever it is that he can do. So you hope that there's not too many training wheels on him with Tocchet and that you can go forward with this and see the development come to complete fruition here. And that certainly would be, to me, that would be like the first point that you would bring up in an interview process here would be making sure that all aligns so that you are bringing in the right guy from the start.
Kevin Durso, plenty more on the website. Go to 973ESPN.com. And, of course, the Flyers, your home for Flyers hockey, 97.3 ESPN, our sister station, Rock 104 Run. They're going to have Rick Tocchet behind the bench. And, of course, that will change things for this team moving forward when free agency and everything happens. Kevin Durso on the X platform at Kevin_Durso. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right, as always, Kevin Durso here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN and the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app. Watch the show on your TV, at home, phone, tablet, or device. Go to youtube.com/@MikeGillShow and on the X platform @MikeGillShow. So Rick Tocchet, I know a lot of people would say, yeah, I mean, people in the building pumped up about Tocchet coming back. Other people might say, wow, the Flyers go down that road again. They brought back a Flyers guy. Was that the way that you wanted it? Bring back someone from the Flyers family. Tortorella, they went outside the family a little bit. So this one they come back and bring in an old Flyer. So Flyers kind of going back to their roots, if you will. I'm Mike Gill. This is the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN.